Finally, I'm about to start the involved but very doable process of installing the Summit Racing Performance camshaft in the C6's LS2, along with some supporting modifications like the PAC valve springs, the Brian Tooley Racing version 2 trunnion upgrade kit, chromoly push rods, a Cloy's billet single roller, timing chain set, and a few other components. My goal is for this video to be the most comprehensive one on YouTube so that you can use it to determine if this is a job you want to tackle yourself, and if so, you can use it again and often as a reference while you're installing your camshaft. If you missed it, I did a video where we talked about several main camshaft characteristics that you should be aware of when rationally selecting a camshaft for your intended use, because trust me, not everybody needs a stage 4 monster camshaft. I certainly don't, and in fact, the one that I selected has the specifications right here, and I would classify this cam as being within the mild range, albeit on the aggressive side of that range. After that video, I did another one where we discussed the components that you really need to replace along with a performance aftermarket camshaft, things like performance valve springs and chromoly push rods. We also talked about other components that you may or may not have to replace depending on your situation and budget, things like the oil pump, the timing chain set, and roller lifters. Now let's finally dive into the camshaft installation, and I've already taken a few moments to get the car ready for what's about to come. I've got the fenders well protected so they won't accidentally get scratched while I'm working, and I've got a nice bright light focused on the front of the engine so the video should pick up every step nicely so that you can follow along and actually see what I'm doing. Now, let's get started.
Toys for life.
The first step is to remove both front tires. This will give us good access to the tie rod ends that we need to remove from the knuckles in order to be able to slide the steering rack out of the way for access to the vibration damper. Next, remove the negative battery cable from the battery and set it off to the side. Now I will remove the passenger side engine cover, followed by one of the heat shield fasteners, and then move to the driver's side and do the same. Then remove the air intake heat shield. Now I'll go ahead and remove my stock LS7 air intake assembly. The method is similar for removing the LS2 or the LS3 air intake assembly. Next, let's get the radiator hold down bracket out of the way. It is held in place by 2 screws on each side of the radiator. Then lift the steam hose out from the clips and remove the hold down bracket. Now I'm going to remove the driver's side coil pack assembly. Start by removing the coil harness plug from the main harness connector, followed by the spark plug wires from the coils. Mine come off easy because I always make sure to include a little dielectric grease inside the boots when changing wires. Now we can remove the 5 bolts that hold the coil pack to the valve cover, and finally disconnect the small harness that goes to the oxygen sensor, and now we can lift the coil pack assembly out of the way. This isn't too bad, but I hate grime, so I cleaned it up immediately. Now we can go do the exact same thing to remove the passenger side coil pack assembly, and then clean that grime as well. Now I'm going to slide underneath and remove the anti-sway bar because it's quick and simple to remove, and it frees up quite a bit of real estate underneath the car. There's a nut to remove at each end, and then 2 small bolts hold each bushing clamp to the cradle, and that's it. Plus, now is a good time to inspect your end links for excessive play, and mine turn out to be in good shape. Next, I'm going to remove the cooling fan assembly. It is possible to remove the fan and radiator as one unit, but I prefer to separate them as it is super easy. There are just 2 bolts to remove. Here is the first one. Then we need to disconnect the fan's electrical plug from the harness. And by the way, on the C6s, these plugs are known to melt and fail due to the high amperage draw, but thankfully mine shows no signs of excessive heat, resistance, or deterioration. Now I'll go back up top quick and pop the hoses out from their holders on top of the shroud, and once that's done, I can go back underneath and lift the fan assembly off of its holders. That's these little guys right here. Then I can carefully remove the assembly from underneath the car. Here are the little perches I was talking about on the fan assembly that slide into the grooves on the radiator. There are 4 of them, and here are where the 2 bolts go that secure the fan assembly in place. Now let's get the radiator out, and that starts by draining it. The petcock unscrews easily since it's plastic, and I'll grab some lunch while the coolant drains. Here's something to be aware of. Our cars take orange Dexcool, and in case you're wondering, in my opinion, the issues they had with Dexcool were resolved years ago, and Dexcool is the coolant I use in our C5 and C6s. That having been said, our cars are over 10 years old, and sometimes previous owners have changed the type of coolant in your car prior to your ownership. If you drain the coolant into a dark container, you really don't know if it's green, yellow, or orange, so always put some into a clear or white container to find out for sure. Now I'll remove the lower radiator hose and carefully pry it off of the plastic tank. Moving back up top, now the radiator is just sitting in place and we need to lift the condenser up and off of its perches and set it down a few inches forward of its current location. There are 2 perches on each side. But first we'll have to remove the steam tube, which I will do in the middle where it is easy to get at the clamp, and finally I'll remove the upper radiator hose, and I like to bungee it out of the way. Now we can lift the condenser carefully and set it forward to the radiator, and finally the radiator can be lifted out. My radiator actually looks pretty darn clean, but the condenser definitely has a fair amount of debris lodged in it. This is the best opportunity you will have to thoroughly blow the crud out of your radiator and condenser to help lower those summer coolant temperatures. And in my opinion, you would be a fool not to take advantage of this situation. The best part is it's basically free. Here's a look at the crud that came out of my condenser. Speaking of condensers, I'll be leaving it connected and installed in the car, and I'll just carefully move it out of the way when the time comes to remove the old camshaft and install the new one. Because removing the condenser would be too much work. You'd have to evacuate its system and then recharge it when you're done. So instead, we'll just work around it. To minimize the chance of damaging the condenser or the one hard line that feeds it, I use a bungee cord to support it on the driver's side, which prevents it from dropping down while I continue my disassembly work. Then I discovered the first unforeseen problem. By removing the radiator, I had uncovered some hidden damage to a wiring harness. This part of the harness crosses right underneath the air intake system, and it's always in close contact with the radiator. The combination of it getting up to 200 degrees every time the car is running has taken its toll on the wiring loom that protects the harness, and as you can see, it is so brittle in this one spot that it actually just crumbles. And here's another spot where it is worn far enough that it has reached down to the copper conductor. If this had come into contact with a source of ground, it likely would have shorted out, blown a fuse, and something in the C6 would have stopped working. Fortunately, I have some loom in stock, and the repair only takes a few minutes. I first made sure to cover the wiring harness in some real underhood electrical tape, then I spliced in a new piece of loom to protect the harness for the next 15 years. That's going to do it for part 1 of the highly detailed C6 Corvette camshaft installation. If you got any value out of this video, tap that thumbs up below so YouTube knows to share it with the Corvette community. Consider subscribing so you don't miss part 2, and most of all, thanks for watching.